I'm Veronica, 28, and my life as a New York art curator was predictable until last month when my identical twin Victoria showed up at my door. Her face was bruised, her eyes haunted. We haven't been as close since she married Eric, but seeing her broken like that, it awakened something fierce in me. We hatched a plan that night, one we'd perfected since childhood, switching places. Only this time it wasn't for fun. It was justice. Before I tell you how I dismantled her abuser's life piece by piece, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe if you believe in sisterhood and standing up to monsters hiding behind wedding rings. My life in New York City was everything I'd worked for: successful, independent, enviable from the outside. As the youngest curator at the Pearson Gallery, I'd built a reputation for discovering emerging artists and creating exhibitions that challenged perspectives. My upcoming international showcase was set to be career-defining, featuring artists from regions traditionally underrepresented in Western galleries. My apartment in Chelsea reflected my success: minimalist, with carefully selected statement pieces, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city I'd conquered. It was exactly what I'd dreamed of during those years of internships and graduate school. But returning to that empty apartment each night sometimes felt hollow despite the expensive furnishings and prestigious address. Dating in New York had become a series of interesting but ultimately disconnected experiences. There was Michael the architect, with fascinating theories about urban spaces, but no interest in emotional intimacy. Then Julian, the literary agent, who could talk brilliantly about everyone's stories except his own. I wasn't unhappy exactly, just aware of a subtle emptiness that success hadn't filled. Victoria and I grew up in Ann Arbor, Michigan, in a middle-class neighborhood where we were known as the twins, long before we were known as individuals. Our parents divorced when we were 12, fracturing our family but somehow strengthening our bond. We became each other's constant while shuttling between two households, developing an unspoken language of glances and subtle gestures that no one else could decipher. As we grew older, our paths diverged naturally. Victoria was always drawn to stability and connection. She wanted the traditional markers of success: marriage, a beautiful home, perhaps children someday. She met Eric during her junior year of college while I was studying abroad in Florence. By 23, she was married and moving into their first home in a Connecticut suburb, while I was accepting my first assistant curator position in Manhattan. "You two are like opposite sides of the same coin," our mother would say during holiday gatherings, not realizing how that coin was slowly being wedged between us by circumstance and distance. Our twin connection had always been our superpower. As children, we perfected the art of switching places, fooling teachers, friends, even occasionally our parents. We developed a secret language with made-up words that became our private communication channel. We knew each other's mannerisms so completely that we could become each other without conscious thought. In college, when Victoria came down with mono during finals week, I took her art history exam while she recovered in our dorm room. I got her an A, and the professor never suspected. It wasn't about deception for its own sake. It was about protecting each other, being each other's safety net. But these past few years, that connection had faded as Victoria's marriage progressed. Our weekly phone calls became monthly, then sporadic. When we did talk, Victoria seemed measured, careful with her words, as if someone was listening over her shoulder. I noticed but didn't push, respecting what I thought was her new life taking priority. I'd only met Eric Wheeler twice, once at their wedding and again at our grandmother's funeral 2 years ago. He was undeniably handsome, tall, with dark hair, always perfectly styled. Expensive watches, custom suits. As an investment banker, he exuded success and confidence. His charm was evident in how he worked the room at their wedding, remembering everyone's names, making each person feel momentarily special. But something about him made me uneasy. The way his hand would grip Victoria's waist just a little too firmly, how he'd interrupt her stories to clarify details, how his smile never quite reached his eyes when she was talking. I dismissed these observations as overprotectiveness on my part, maybe even a tinge of jealousy that my twin had found what appeared to be love. Victoria's calls and visits became increasingly infrequent. She missed our birthday last year for the first time ever, sending an expensive gift with a brief note instead of our traditional celebration. When I suggested visiting, there was always some reason why the timing wasn't right. Eric's work schedule, house renovations, social obligations. The distance between us grew until I barely recognized the woman whose heartbeat had once synchronized with mine. The knock came at 11:42 p.m. on a Tuesday in April. I was at my dining table, surrounded by artist portfolios for the upcoming exhibition, my laptop open to budget spreadsheets that weren't balancing. Rain pattered against the windows, and I'd been so absorbed in my work that the sudden sound made me jump. Opening the door, I froze. Victoria stood there, soaked from the rain, her normally perfect appearance in disarray, her blonde hair identical to mine, but usually styled in soft waves, while I kept mine straight, hung in wet tangles. She wore a wrinkled blouse half tucked into jeans and no coat despite the April chill. But it was her face that stopped my breath. A purplish bruise bloomed along her right cheekbone. Her lower lip was split at the corner, slightly swollen. Her eyes, the same hazel as mine, were red-rimmed and haunted. When our gazes met, something passed between us that transcended words, the silent language we'd developed in childhood. "V," she whispered, using my childhood nickname. I didn't know where else to go. I pulled her inside, instinct taking over as shock gave way to protective rage. After settling her on my sofa with a blanket and hot tea, I gently tried to understand what had happened. Victoria's hands trembled as she held the mug, a bruise circling her left wrist like a macabre bracelet. "It's not as bad as it looks," she said, automatically an obvious lie. "I just needed some space tonight. Tomorrow will be better." I recognized the deflection, having seen it in many abuse survivors during my volunteer work at a women's shelter during graduate school. Instead of pushing, I sat beside her and waited, offering the safety of silence until she was ready. An hour passed before Victoria's carefully constructed walls began to crumble. It started with tears she couldn't hold back, then halting fragments of truth. "He has rules about everything," she said quietly. "The house has to be perfect. I need to look perfect. Say the right things to the right people. Never embarrass him." As the night deepened, so did her revelations. Eric's charming public persona masked a calculating cruelty behind closed doors. It had started subtly criticisms disguised as concerned suggestions that became requirements. He'd isolated her from friends with accusations of their negative influence. Family visits became increasingly restricted. "He has access to all my accounts," she admitted, staring into her tea. "I have an allowance like a child. He checks the receipts, questions every purchase." The most recent incident, the one that finally drove her to flee, happened when Eric discovered she'd been secretly taking online psychology classes. His career required frequent travel, and in his absence, she'd been trying to rebuild her education, perhaps eventually her independence. "He went through my laptop," Victoria said, voice hollow. "Found the course emails. He said I was betraying him, planning to leave. That's when he—" Her hand drifted to her bruised cheek. "It wasn't the first time he'd grabbed me, pushed me, but he'd never hit my face before." As dawn approached, the full picture of Victoria's nightmare emerged. Eric Wheeler wasn't just controlling, he was dangerous. His position at Hamilton Financial gave him connections with local police, judges, city officials. He'd made it clear that if Victoria ever left his influence, would ensure she got nothing, would be portrayed as unstable, would lose any credibility. "He has photos of me," she whispered, shame coloring her voice. "From when we first met. He says he'll send them to potential employers if I try to start over somewhere." My apartment, once spacious, felt too small to contain my growing rage. I paced as Victoria curled into herself on the sofa, suggesting conventional solutions, restraining orders, police reports, women's shelters. Victoria shook her head at each suggestion. "You don't understand how connected he is. The police chief plays golf with him. His firm handles the retirement accounts for half the judges in the county." We fell silent, the impossible situation hanging between us. Then Victoria looked up, a spark of her old self flickering in her eyes. "Remember Mrs. Abernathy's class, when you took that math test for me? I nodded, not immediately grasping her meaning. What if... Victoria hesitated, then straightened her shoulders. What if we switched again, just long enough for me to disappear properly, to gather what I need? The idea hung between us, absurd and perfect simultaneously. We stared at each other, identical faces reflecting the dawning possibility of an escape that might actually work. The twin swap wasn't a decision we made lightly. That first morning, as Victoria slept in my bed after her emotional revelations, I made coffee and considered the full implications of what she'd suggested. My professional responsibilities were substantial. The international exhibition was barely 6 weeks away, representing artists who'd trusted me with their work and careers. I had meetings scheduled with major donors, press interviews, arranged logistics to finalize. When Victoria woke and joined me at the kitchen island, she immediately sensed my hesitation. "It was a crazy idea," she backtracked. "I wasn't thinking clearly. I'll figure something else out." "No," I said firmly. "I'm not concerned about me. I'm worried about putting you in danger. If Eric discovers the switch..." "He won't," Victoria interjected. "Not if we're careful. You know we can do this. We've been practicing our whole lives." We spent that day outlining every aspect of the potential switch. I contacted the gallery director explaining a family emergency requiring immediate attention. Years of reliability had earned me some flexibility. I could work remotely on critical aspects of the exhibition while my assistant handled in-person meetings. We created a cover story about our mother facing a health crisis in Europe, requiring extended support. The ethical questions weighed heavily. Was this deception justified? Were there legal implications we hadn't considered? What about the potential for escalation if Eric discovered our plan? "The system won't protect me," Victoria said simply. "I've researched everything. Without documented incidents, without witnesses, it's my word against his. And he's very, very good at making people believe him." As daylight faded, our plan took concrete shape. Victoria would assume my identity in New York, managing my remote work and correspondence. I would return to Connecticut, as Victoria gathering evidence of abuse and financial misconduct Victoria suspected but couldn't prove. We'd establish a secure communication channel through a messaging app with disappearing texts. The practical aspects required meticulous attention. Victoria trimmed my hair to match her slightly shorter style, then showed me how she typically wore her makeup slightly more conservative than my own preferences. We exchanged clothing, ensuring I understood her wardrobe's unwritten rules. Nothing too bright or attention-grabbing, nothing that didn't have Eric's tacit approval. "He likes dresses more than pants," she explained, sorting through photos on her phone to show me typical outfits. "Natural makeup, but always wearing some. Hair down and styled, never messy or in a ponytail unless I'm cleaning." Victoria shared Eric's schedule, his early morning workouts, late nights at the office, twice weekly regular Thursday dinner with clients Sunday, golf with colleagues. She detailed his preferences from how he liked his shirts, ironed to which wine to serve with different meals. She mapped out the house, identifying the hidden cameras in the common areas that Eric claimed were for security. "The master bathroom doesn't have cameras," she whispered. "It's the only place I'm sure is safe to communicate with you." I needed to establish secure access to my professional life for Victoria. I shared passwords to my work accounts, briefed her on ongoing projects and relationships with key contacts. We practiced email responses in each other's styles. Victoria more formal and reserved, mine more direct and occasionally sarcastic. "Your assistant Margot knows you're working on the Beijing artist contract," Victoria quizzed me. "What's your stance on the exhibition space allocation?" "I'm pushing for the main gallery despite the director's hesitation. Margot's drafting alternate floor plans to show how it could work with the existing schedule." I responded, demonstrating my grasp of current work issues Victoria might need to address. We set a 2-week timeline with plans to evaluate at the halfway point. Our objectives were clear: document abuse, locate financial records. Victoria believed would show misappropriation of her inheritance, and create an escape plan with sufficient evidence to protect her legally. On our final night before the switch, we sat cross-legged on my living room floor, surrounded by notes and photographs. Victoria had never looked so alive since before her marriage, the strategic planning awakening something that had been dormant. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, studying my face, her face with concern. "More sure than I've been about any gallery opening or acquisition," I replied. "We protect each other. Always have, always will." We spent that night practicing being each other the specific way. Victoria tilted her head when listening my habit of gesturing with my left hand when explaining something important. By morning, we weren't just twins who looked alike. We were each other's perfect reflection, ready to step into lives that weren't our own. The suburban Connecticut home Victoria shared with Eric looked exactly like success should look, a colonial revival with perfect landscaping, situated in a neighborhood where every property whispered of wealth and achievement. Driving Victoria's Audi into the circular driveway, I felt an unexpected wave of anxiety wash over me. Using Victoria's keys, I entered what would be my home for the coming weeks. The interior was a showcase of tasteful luxury neutral colors, expensive furniture that managed to look both perfect and untouched. Family photos lined one wall, Victoria and Eric smiling at charity events on vacation beaches at ski resorts. I studied her smile in these images, seeing now what I hadn't noticed before. It never reached her eyes. Victoria had prepared me thoroughly for the house's layout, but being there physically was different. The spaciousness felt not like freedom, but surveillance. The open concept design meant being visible from almost anywhere on the main floor. The pristine kitchen with its marble countertops showed no signs of actual cooking or living. Following Victoria's instructions, I checked in with their housekeeper Margaret, who came 3 times weekly. I reviewed the calendar on the refrigerator, noting Eric's business trip. He wouldn't return for 2 days, giving me valuable time to acclimate to Victoria's world. That evening, I discovered the hidden cameras Victoria had warned me about. Subtle black domes in the ceiling corners of the living room, kitchen, and main hallway. A small lens embedded in the thermostat. Another disguised as a smoke detector above the home office door. I maintained Victoria's normal routine, knowing I was being watched, moving through the space as she would, checking that dinner would be ready for Eric's return, tidying already immaculate rooms. Eric called that night from Chicago. Victoria had prepared me for this, coaching me through his typical questions and conversation patterns. "The Jensen account is giving me hell," he said without preamble. "How was your day?" "Quiet," I replied, matching Victoria's slightly softer speaking tone. "I had lunch with Susan." This was a planned response. Susan was a neighbor Victoria occasionally saw safe to mention. "Did you call about the landscaper? The eastern bed needs to be redone before the neighborhood association meeting." I felt the test in his question. Victoria had briefed me on this. She'd already handled this task last week, and Eric knew it. "They're coming on Thursday, just as we arranged last week." "I confirmed yesterday," I replied evenly, passing his small test. The conversation continued with similar subtle probes. Had I picked up his dry cleaning? Was I planning to attend the charity committee meeting? Had I ordered the wine for next week's dinner party? Each question seemed designed to catch a mistake, to identify any deviation from Victoria's carefully controlled existence. When Eric returned 2 days later, I faced my first real challenge. He arrived late evening, his tall frame filling the doorway with commanding presence. In person, his controlling aura was palpable in a way Victoria's descriptions hadn't fully captured. "You changed something," were his first words. Eyes narrowing as he studied me. My heart stuttered, but I maintained Victoria's demeanor, slightly deferential, careful. "Just tried a new face cream. My skin was feeling dry." He studied me for another long moment before nodding almost imperceptibly. "The Jensen deal closed. We should celebrate." That first evening established our pattern. Eric's scrutiny was constant, but subtle questions about conversations we'd supposedly had, references to shared experiences, observations about my appearance or behavior. Each interaction felt like navigating a minefield where any misstep could trigger suspicion. The most challenging aspect was avoiding physical intimacy while maintaining the façade. Victoria had warned me this would be difficult. Eric expected affection on his terms. I developed strategies mentioning a migraine falling asleep on the couch, before he came to bed suggesting he must be too tired after his trip. Each excuse bought time while I searched for evidence. During Eric's workdays, I began methodical exploration of the house, focusing on areas Victoria had never been able to search thoroughly. In a hidden compartment of his office desk, I discovered Victoria's personal journal, a record of incidents, dates, emotional states that she'd kept secretly for months. The entries painted a picture of escalating control and abuse. April 15th. Eric threw a glass at the wall when dinner was late. Said I was disrespecting his time. Spent 3 hours cleaning while he watched. May 29th. Wore the blue dress to the firm dinner. Eric said I was flirting with James. Didn't speak to me for 2 days after. Called me a whore. July 8th. Found out he's been reading my emails. Change password. He slapped me when I wouldn't give him the new one. Reading my sister's private pain was almost unbearable, but it provided crucial documentation we'd need later. In Eric's file cabinet behind tax records, I found financial statements Victoria had never seen, accounts in his name alone containing what appeared to be her inheritance from our grandfather. Victoria had believed the money was invested jointly, but these statements showed Eric had diverted nearly $500,000 to private accounts. I also discovered gambling debts, significant losses at high-stakes poker games he played with business associates. Victoria had no idea their financial situation included this vulnerability. Eric's carefully constructed image of perfect success had cracks my sister had never been allowed to see. As I gathered digital evidence using secure cloud storage Victoria could access, I also witnessed the extent of her isolation. Neighbors avoided extended conversation, quickly retreating to their homes when I attempted friendly engagement. When I checked Victoria's phone contacts, dozens of names had been deleted over time. College friends, former colleagues, even some family members. The few social connections that remained were with wives of Eric's business associates, women who seemed equally constrained, our conversations limited to superficial topics like home decor and charity functions. One woman, Amanda, briefly touched my arm during a chance meeting at the local coffee shop, whispering, "If you ever need anything," before her husband appeared, and she immediately stepped back, smile fixed in place. Victoria's life had become a beautiful prison with surveillance, both electronic and social. Every aspect of her existence was designed to maintain Eric's image and control. By the end of that first week, my sympathy for my twin had transformed into cold, focused determination to dismantle the system that had trapped her. Beginning the second week, I implemented subtle changes to disrupt Eric's sense of control while gathering evidence of his abusive behavior. My approach was calculated, small enough actions to seem like mistakes rather than rebellion, but consistent enough to create friction. I forgot to pick up his favorite breakfast pastry, apologizing profusely but noting his disproportionate anger. I rearranged decorative items in the living room, claiming I was dusting when he demanded an explanation. I prepared meals that weren't quite to his exacting standards, slightly overcooked or underseasoned. With each minor deviation, I documented his reactions, sometimes managing to capture audio recordings on my phone hidden in a pocket. "What the hell is this?" he demanded one evening, pushing away a plate where the food presentation wasn't precisely as he preferred. "Are you becoming stupid or just lazy?" The verbal abuse flowed so naturally from him that I understood how normalized it had become in their marriage. Where Victoria would have apologized frantically, I offered calm acknowledgement with a hint of backbone that was subtle but new. "You're right, the presentation isn't perfect. The flavor is good, though," I responded, watching his surprise at not receiving immediate submission. While Eric was at work, I began methodically building connections Victoria had been denied. I made friendly overtures to neighbors, beginning with casual conversations that couldn't possibly threaten Eric's control, but established my presence in the community as something more than Eric Wheeler's silent wife. I reconnected with neighbors who had drifted away, like Carol across the street, who had once been friendly with Victoria until Eric deemed her gossipy. Over coffee in her kitchen, away from my house's surveillance, Carol revealed how she'd witnessed Eric berating Victoria in their driveway last Christmas, how she'd tried to reach out afterward, but Victoria had become unreachable. I was worried, Carol admitted. But he's so respected in the community. I didn't know what to do. These small community connections would become witnesses if needed later, people who could testify to the pattern of isolation and control. The most significant discoveries came during a day when Eric was at a golf tournament with clients. With hours of guaranteed privacy, I conducted a thorough search of his home office, bypassing his computer password, using information Victoria had provided about his typical security choices. What I found shocked me beyond what Victoria had suspected. Hidden in encrypted folders were documents revealing significant financial fraud. Eric had been misrepresenting investment returns to certain clients, creating false statements while pocketing the difference. Another folder contained tax documents showing years of deliberate underreporting of income. Even more disturbing were photos suggesting infidelity with at least 2 women who appeared to be junior employees at his firm. The images weren't explicit, but showed intimate dinners, hotel lobbies, his hand possessively on a woman's lower back, all time-stamped during periods he told Victoria he was working late or traveling for business. I carefully copied everything to secure cloud storage, ensuring the original files appeared undisturbed. This evidence wasn't just leverage for Victoria's freedom, it was protection against Eric's potential retaliation. With this ammunition, I began the most dangerous phase of my plan-controlled confrontations, designed to document his abusive responses. I selected moments carefully, ensuring I had recording capability, and choosing topics that would trigger his control issues without putting me in physical danger. When Eric questioned a small purchase on the credit card statement, Victoria's typical art supplies, I didn't immediately justify it as Victoria would have. "I don't need to explain a $40 purchase for my hobby," I stated calmly, phone recording in my pocket. His response was immediate and revealing. "You spend my money, you explain every fucking cent. Have you forgotten how this works? You have nothing that isn't mine." These recorded outbursts provided irrefutable evidence of the emotional abuse Victoria had endured, his own words damning him more effectively than any accusation could. The strategic undermining of Eric's perfect façade extended to his professional life as well. When accompanying him to a business dinner with important clients, I subtly mentioned his recent late nights when a colleague asked about work-life balance. "Eric is so dedicated," I said with a perfect smile. "Some weeks I barely see him until after midnight. So many urgent matters keeping him at the office." The colleague's wife raised an eyebrow, and Eric's hand tightened around his fork. He knew exactly what I was implying, and the threat to his carefully constructed image was clear. I also began the process of securing Victoria's financial independence. Using information from the documents I discovered, I made a carefully worded call to their family attorney expressing confusion about the status of Victoria's inheritance. The attorney, believing he was speaking to Victoria, confirmed details that contradicted what Eric had told her. This created an official record of inquiry that would be difficult for Eric to dismiss later. Most satisfyingly, I reconnected with Victoria's estranged cousin Rachel, who Eric had deemed a bad influence years ago. Rachel had recently become a family law attorney specializing in divorce cases. Our lunch meeting, ostensibly a casual family reconnection, was actually groundwork for legal support Victoria would need. "I've missed you, Vic," Rachel said, studying my face with concern. "You've changed." "Yes," I replied carefully. "I'm starting to remember who I used to be." With each calculated move, I was simultaneously building Victoria's support network and undermining Eric's control. The evidence mounted daily, and our nightly secure communications showed Victoria growing stronger in my absence, her voice finding its confidence again as she managed my professional life with surprising skill. By day 10 of our swap, Eric's frustration was palpable. His perfectly controlled world was developing hairline fractures he couldn't quite identify or repair. The power was shifting imperceptibly but definitively, and the growing uncertainty in his eyes was the first taste of justice for my sister's years of suffering. 2 days before our planned swap back, the carefully constructed façade began to crumble more rapidly than anticipated. Eric's business was facing unexpected scrutiny. An anonymous tip had prompted an internal audit at his firm, focusing specifically on the accounts I had discovered were fraudulent. Though he never explicitly said so, his agitation made it clear he suspected the source of the leak. The morning began with Eric receiving multiple urgent calls, his voice tense as he paced the bedroom, responding to questions from colleagues and supervisors. When he emerged, his composure was visibly strained. "Who have you been talking to?" he demanded, blocking my path to the kitchen. "What do you mean?" I maintained Victoria's typical confusion when confronted. "Don't play stupid," he hissed, stepping closer. "Someone's asking questions about the Donovan accounts. Accounts you shouldn't know anything about." "I don't know what you're talking about, Eric. I don't know anything about your clients." I kept my voice steady, though my heart raced. The confrontation was coming sooner than planned. He studied my face with suspicious intensity. "You're different lately. Something's changed." For hours, the tension built. Eric canceled his workday, staying home to watch me making unexpected appearances as I moved through the house. I felt his scrutiny intensifying, the predator sensing something amiss but unable to identify precisely what had changed. The breaking point came that evening. Eric received a call that sent him into a rage, his supervisor informing him he was temporarily suspended pending investigation. When he stormed into the kitchen where I was preparing dinner, his control had completely fractured. "They're freezing my accounts," he shouted, slamming his phone onto the counter so hard the screen cracked. "Someone sent them documents, internal documents, that could only have come from my personal files." I remained calm, though positioned myself near the door, conscious of potential escalation. "That sounds serious? Could it be someone at work who has access?" "Don't give me that innocent act," he snarled, advancing toward me. "You've been in my office. You've been talking to people, neighbors, old friends, making calls when you think I don't know." With each accusation, he moved closer, his body language becoming more threatening. I recognized the pattern Victoria had described, the buildup to physical violence. "You're not even acting like yourself anymore," he continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "It's like you've become a different person." The irony of his accurate observation wasn't lost on me. I had backed toward the living room, maintaining eye contact, keenly aware of the nearest exits. "Eric, you're scaring me," I said deliberately, using Victoria's typical phrase, though my tone lacked her usual fear. "Good," he responded, closing the distance between us. "You should be scared. You have no idea what happens to people who try to ruin me." When his hand shot out to grab my arm, I was prepared, shifting just enough that his grip wasn't as firm as he intended. This small act of resistance, something Victoria would never have attempted, seemed to confirm his suspicions that something fundamental had changed. "Who the fuck are you?" he whispered, studying my face with newfound uncertainty. The moment had arrived sooner than planned, but I was prepared. With a calm I didn't entirely feel, I straightened my posture and shifted subtly out of Victoria's habitual stance. "You're right, Eric. I'm not Victoria." His expression cycled through confusion, disbelief, and dawning horror as I continued. "I'm Veronica, her twin sister." I watched recognition flood his features. "Victoria's been safe in New York while I've been gathering evidence of everything you've done to her." He released my arm as if burned, stepping back. "That's impossible." "Is it?" I reached for my phone, turning the screen to show him a photo taken that morning, Victoria in my apartment holding today's newspaper. "We switched almost 2 weeks ago, long enough to document your abuse, your fraud, your affairs." Eric's face drained of color as he processed the implications. "You can't prove anything." "Actually, I can prove everything." I maintained distance between us, acutely aware of the danger in cornering him. "Every financial document, every threatening comment, every controlling behavior. I have recordings, witnesses, documentation. Those are private files you had no right." "Neither did you have the right to steal Victoria's inheritance," I interrupted coolly, "or to isolate her from friends and family, or to make her feel worthless and trapped." His composure fractured completely, rage and fear battling for dominance. "You think anyone will believe you? Do you know who I am in this community? Who my connections are?" "I do know," I acknowledged. "That's why I've been extremely thorough." The evidence isn't just with me, it's with lawyers, with secure cloud storage, with trusted friends. If anything happens to me or to Victoria, everything goes public immediately. I pulled out a manila envelope from behind a cushion where I'd hidden it earlier, anticipating this confrontation might come. These are our terms. Victoria wants a divorce with a fair settlement reflecting the inheritance you stole. She wants the house sold, and proceeds divided equitably. She wants no contact from you ever again. Eric snatched the envelope, tearing it open to scan the documents inside. A detailed accounting of his financial misconduct, photographs documenting Victoria's injuries over time from her hidden journal, transcripts of his recorded threats. "You fucking bitch," he whispered, but there was defeat edging into his voice. "You have 24 hours to begin compliance," I continued calmly. "Victoria's lawyer will contact yours tomorrow. If you fight this, if you threaten her, if you attempt any retaliation, the evidence goes to the police, your firm's ethics board, and the SEC simultaneously." His hand twitched, as if he might strike me, but self-preservation won out. Even in his rage, Eric Wheeler calculated odds and risks. It was how he'd succeeded in business, in manipulating Victoria, in maintaining his facade for years. "Get out of my house," he finally managed, voice shaking with suppressed fury. "Gladly," I replied, retrieving the pre-packed bag I'd strategically placed near the door that morning, sensing the confrontation approaching. "Remember 24 hours. Your entire carefully constructed life can either change on your terms or be destroyed completely on ours." As I walked out the door, Eric called after me. "She'll regret this. You both will." I turned back, meeting his gaze directly. "No, Eric. The only regret here is that she didn't leave years ago. But unlike you, we don't live in the past. Victoria has a future now, one that doesn't include you." Driving away from the house that had been my sister's prison, I felt not triumph but grim satisfaction. The plan had accelerated, but the outcome was secure. Victoria was free and her abuser had been exposed. The rest would unfold through legal channels, with my twin finally holding the power that had been systematically stolen from her for years. The immediate aftermath of my confrontation with Eric unfolded with dizzying speed. I drove directly to a hotel we designated as our emergency meeting point, where Victoria joined me within hours, having taken the first train from New York after my urgent call. When we reunited in the hotel room, the emotional weight of the past 2 weeks crashed over us. Victoria alternated between anxiety about potential retaliation and overwhelming relief that her imprisonment had ended. "Is it really over?" she asked repeatedly, pacing the hotel room. "He'll fight back. He always does." "He can try," I assured her, showing her the extensive evidence I'd gathered. "But he'd be destroying himself in the process. Eric's whole life is built on his reputation. That's his vulnerability, and we've leveraged it perfectly." True to prediction, Eric's first move was attempting damage control rather than revenge. By morning, Victoria's lawyer, Rachel, had received communication from Eric's attorney requesting private negotiation rather than court proceedings. The man who had seemed all-powerful in the confines of their marriage was now desperately trying to avoid public exposure. Victoria observed this development with something approaching wonder. I spent years believing he was untouchable. Abusers maintain control by creating that illusion, I explained, remembering conversations with abuse survivors during my volunteer work. Once that illusion shatters, they often crumble surprisingly quickly. While Victoria remained safely away from Connecticut, I helped her secure temporary housing in Manhattan, a furnished apartment with security features and a doorman building. Our physical resemblance became an asset during this transition, allowing me to handle public-facing tasks, while Victoria remained protected from potential encounters with Eric. The media inevitably caught wind of improprieties at Eric's firm, though we carefully ensured the focus remained on the financial misconduct rather than the personal abuse. Headlines about Hamilton Financial under investigation appeared in business publications, each story diminishing Eric's power further. Victoria struggled with complex emotions as events unfolded. Despite everything, years of psychological manipulation had created bonds not easily severed. "Sometimes I feel guilty," she admitted during a late-night conversation in her new apartment. "Like I've destroyed everything we built. He destroyed it, I reminded her gently. By choosing control instead of partnership, by hurting you instead of loving you, you're just finally acknowledging what was already broken. While Victoria processed her emotions, I helped her connect with a therapist specializing in domestic abuse recovery. Lyndon created a safe space for Victoria to recognize patterns of manipulation and begin rebuilding her sense of self-worth. Their twice-weekly sessions became anchors in Victoria's evolving routine. Today we talked about love bombing, Victoria shared after one session. How Eric would follow episodes of cruelty with extravagant gestures, the diamond bracelet after he pushed me down the stairs, the surprise vacation after locking me out all night. Dr. Linden called it the cycle of abuse. I just thought it was normal marriage ups and downs. While Victoria focused on healing, I resumed my professional responsibilities at the gallery, though the experience had fundamentally changed me. Artists whose work explored themes of power, identity, and transformation suddenly resonated more deeply. My upcoming exhibition subtly shifted focus, incorporating pieces that explored duality and resilience. The legal proceedings moved forward with surprising efficiency, largely because Eric recognized fighting would only worsen his situation. Victoria's inheritance was legally returned to her control. The Connecticut house was placed on the market with proceeds to be divided per their settlement agreement. Most importantly, strict no-contact provisions were established with significant penalties for violations. Meeting with colleagues of Victoria's mother at the safe house had provided crucial links to her past identity. Sarah Jenkins, who had worked alongside their mother on research projects, revealed how Victoria had once been pursuing clinical psychology before meeting Eric. "Your mother would be so proud to see you reclaiming your path," Sarah told Victoria during a coffee meeting I arranged. "She always said you had natural insight into human behavior." These connections to her pre-Eric life helped Victoria reassemble fragments of her identity. She enrolled in courses to complete the psychology degree she'd abandoned, discovering her academic abilities remained sharp despite years of Eric's undermining. Financial independence provided fundamental security Victoria had lacked for years. With her inheritance recovered and divorce settlement secured, she could make decisions based on preference rather than necessity. Her first independent purchase, a small but bright apartment not far from mine, represented physical and symbolic new beginnings. My own processing of the experience took different forms. The rage I'd contained during the impersonation occasionally surfaced in unexpected moments. Hearing a man speak dismissively to his partner at a restaurant, witnessing subtle controlling behaviors in social settings. I channeled this energy into volunteer work with domestic violence prevention organizations, offering my professional connections to help survivors rebuild careers and independence. 6 months after the confrontation, Victoria's transformation was remarkable. The haunted look had left her eyes. She carried herself differently. Shoulders back, gaze direct. Her natural warmth and intelligence suppressed during her marriage re-emerged as she built new relationships and rekindled old ones. "I ran into Amanda yesterday," Victoria mentioned one evening as we shared dinner at her apartment. Amanda had been the wife of Eric's colleague who'd whispered an offer of help during my impersonation. "She's left Richard," said seeing me get out, gave her courage. This ripple effect, other women finding strength through Victoria's example, became a powerful part of her healing journey. While maintaining appropriate privacy, Victoria occasionally shared her experience in support groups, helping others recognize patterns she'd missed in her own marriage. Our twin connections, strained during Victoria's years with Eric, strengthened in new ways. Weekly sister dinners became sacred ritual. We developed check-in systems that respected independence while maintaining connection. The unbreakable bond of childhood found mature expression in adulthood. 1 year after Victoria appeared bruised at my door, we celebrated with a private milestone recognition. The gallery hosted a special exhibition featuring emerging artists exploring themes of transformation and rebirth. Victoria, now halfway through her psychology program, spoke eloquently at the opening about art's role in healing trauma. Watching my twin address the gathered crowd with confidence and insight, I reflected on our extraordinary journey. The scared woman who'd sought refuge had become a powerful advocate for herself and others. My own perspective on justice, on family bonds, on the lengths we go to protect those we love, had been profoundly transformed. Healing isn't linear, Victoria had told me recently, quoting her therapist. Some days still feel impossible, but those days get fewer, and the impossible feels less overwhelming each time. That night after the exhibition closing, we sat on my apartment balcony overlooking the city lights. Victoria raised her wine glass in a toast. To twins, she said simply, who teach us we're never truly alone. To becoming ourselves again, I added, together and individually. The city pulsed below us, full of stories like ours, some still unfolding in shadow, others emerging into light. I thought about the network of women we'd connected with through this experience, each finding her way toward freedom through different paths. What would you do to protect someone you love? Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between conventional solutions and unconventional justice? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of sisterhood and reclaiming power resonated with you, please hit like and subscribe for more stories about women finding strength in impossible situations. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the most important person to save is yourself.